So today I want to tell you about a job I used to work, a job that was not good for my health, not good mentally, physically, emotionally, all that stuff. But here's the thing, I stayed there for 13 years, and maybe my story can help you. If you don't know me, my name is Michael Joseph. I'm a creative person. I have pretty much made a living at being creative my entire life, except for a couple times where I worked what I always call a day job. In my book, The Creative Virus, I talk about the day job. And a couple of these times I worked the day job for different reasons. And one of them was really, really bad for me. And I want to tell you about it today. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I did learn something from this job that I think has kind of carried me through a lot. I learned that the difference between being happy with a job and being thankful for a job. I was at no point happy with that job, but I was thankful that I had a job that had paid well, good vacation, good benefits, all that sort of things. But it took a long time for me to realize how much that job was taking out of me each day. And it left such a long and crushing effect on me that's, decades after leaving that job, I literally had nightmares that I had to go back there and work. Now, you might be asking, what does a job that has great benefits and great pay and all that have to do with a bad job? Well, it's not for everybody. The thing I'm going to tell you today is not going to fit everybody, but for me as a creative person, it was kind of soul-destroying in a way. The job had zero creativity. It literally, you were doing the same task every day, and sometimes you were doing the same thing on the same machine for a week or 2 weeks at a time. The people that worked there seemed to be just as unhappy as I was. And I can honestly tell you that negative people will bring you down. And it's, I guess I could say another thing I learned from that job is that, you don't want to be around negative people if you don't have to. It was really hard on me. The other thing was the sounds. I'm a music person, so sounds and stuff were all such a big part of my life. When I worked there, the machines in the place were always loud, clanging loud. It was brutal all day long. And the other thing was, on top of all that noise, they had a speaker system throughout the entire factory that played music, and they always played country music, and I absolutely hate country music. So besides all the banging noise, I had to listen to music every day that I absolutely hated. Like it made me miserable. Now, besides all of that stuff, it was somewhat dangerous because you worked with things that could cut you very easily, machinery. And I literally knew two people there when I worked there that lost fingers at that job. And one of them was literally standing right behind me when it happened on his machine. He literally, as soon as it happened, he turned to me and screamed. It was right there, and he lost 2.5 fingers on one of his hands. And I know the other guy the same way, lost part of his thumb, and it just is one of those things that it wasn't that. To make that worse, later on, I got put on a night shift, or they call evening shift, and I could not do any of my artist stuff to where I was going out and performing at shows or networking, because all of that happened at nighttime, and I couldn't do that. So it absolutely killed that too. It was endless stress, and one of the things that happened that still to this day I'd laugh about, but at that point it made me so angry I couldn't even express that anger. So they had a thing where overtime was voluntary, and I wanted my time. I didn't need to make more money. I needed to have more time to chase my dreams. So I kept turning down overtime, and they pulled me in the office and said, "Why are you turning down overtime?" I said, "Well, I don't need the money, so I just need my time." And they're like, "Well, you're supposed to take half of the volunteer overtime." I'm like, "It says volunteer, overtime is voluntary. You don't have to take it, or you're supposed to take it." And I'm like, "But you said it's voluntary." And the guy looked at me, he goes, "I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Simple as this. If you don't take overtime, I'm going to write you up for," how did he say it? "I'm going to write you up for abusing the privilege of turning down overtime." If I didn't take half of the overtime offered, I was going to get written up for abusing the privilege of turning down overtime, and 3 of those would get me fired. Now, one of the key moments that kind of kicked me off to where I said it was my limit, and it isn't for everybody, these sorts of things that happen, but it did it for me. So I was there a long time, and they did some layoffs. And that was the first time in that company's history they ever did layoffs. And that was, again, why it was a good place. And they did it by seniority. And at that point, the building I was working in, I had the least amount of seniority, so I got bumped out on being laid off. But the thing is they would pull me back every month or so saying, hey, we got a week's worth of work. You want to come in? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I would, for an entire year, I would come in and do like 2 weeks here, 3 or 4 days there. And it was fine because I got to chase my dream and I was making some money and it was kind of structured and I was okay with that. And then at one point they pulled me in the office and said, listen, we are able to bring you back full time now if you want to come back. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. Even though I was miserable, I was thankful. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And they said, well, the only problem is you've been laid off over a year. So if you're laid off for over a year, you have to start at the bottom. So beginning pay, beginning seniority, beginning vacations, everything. I would have had to start over after 13 years at the bottom again. And I literally looked at the guy. I'm like, did you wait a year and a month to do this? He's like, oh, was it a year and a month? And I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me. And I was like, I knew the guy that I was talking to. So I said, all these years you told me, work hard and it will pay off. I said, is this what I get? And he goes, don't be insubordinate. And it was like at that point that I was like, you know what, I'm done. And I literally stood up from his desk and walked out and never came back. And I really should have done that sooner. But I want to tell you some things now that I think will help you if you're in that position. So one of the things that I really think is important is that you just cannot quit out of the blue. If you have responsibilities especially, you can't do that. You can't just walk away. You have things, you have to make a plan. It may take you 5 years to get out of that job if you have responsibilities, but you have to start now to be ready in those 5 years to make that step away. Key things is don't get in debt, because I honestly felt that I kind of started living that life as a young person in my 20s, owning motorcycles. I owned multiple motorcycles, multiple cars. I was just living that life, and it put me in debt on things that I shouldn't have been in, and that held me back. One of the other things you have to keep in mind with a job like that is that you are trading your time for money. So if you trade your time for money, you will often, not always, trade who you are, your true person, for an image. Like I was trying to live that image of a person that had money and multiple cars and all these things instead of being who I was, and I was a person who needed to be creative. So be careful in the jobs that you trade your time for money, because you can get caught up in trading that money for a life that isn't yours. And the other thing is that I didn't see almost any of this until after I left. I didn't realize it. So that's why I'm hoping that this helps you, that you see it ahead of time. Now, the only thing that I can give you is a plan system to help you along that process. And it's something that the military uses called PACE. And it is your primary plan, your alternate plan, your contingency plan, and your emergency plan. So getting out of there, you have your primary plan. Your primary plan might be, I'm going to save money, I'm going to get myself out of debt, I'm going to get to the point where I can take a less paying job that either has less hours, there's not as miserable, things like that. An alternate plan would be, I'm going to sell some things like the motorcycles and cars that I don't need. Nobody needs that kind of stuff. At least I didn't. I can't say nobody. But the alternate plan would be to do that. The contingency plan would be, maybe I take an evening job and get myself in somewhere for a short while to maybe balance that out, to where maybe after 6 months of working the evening job and the day job, I can quit the day job and then maybe go on daytime, part-time at the other job. That's a contingency on top of that. And emergency would be simply like throwing yourself at the feet of friends or other jobs saying, I need to do this. It's where you put everything in a fire sale. It's got to go sort of thing. But again, it's not for everybody. And again, I encourage you, do not just jump out of a job and quit. It's hard, but make a plan, because it is doable. Because you may think like, I'm miserable now, I can't take another day of this. But if you get out of there and 6 months after you get out, you're broke and you have nothing and you're going to lose your house or your apartment or anything like that, that's not where you want to be. You want to plan these things out to the best of your ability. But by all means, if you were miserable like I was, get out. Find another way. Figure something out, especially like as an artist, as a creator. A lot of us start out on our own. We don't have responsibilities like a wife or a husband or kids or even a pet. We just create. That's what we want to do. And that was the point I was at with all of this, is that I wanted out of there because I couldn't take that, and the life was not what I wanted. But again, like I said, it took me a lot of years to look back and go, I shouldn't have done any of that. I want to leave one little example with you here on this, and I don't know if it's going to make sense to anybody or not, but back in the 80s, there was a cartoon called Rainbow Bright, and it was about this little girl who was all about rainbows. You can imagine just for the name, Rainbow Bright. When I took that job, the first day I walked in there, I should have known that I shouldn't take the job, because what went through my mind when I walked in is that I felt like someone took Rainbow Bright and put her in a gray box. That was my mental feeling the first day I worked there. And that should have told me right then, don't lay my future plans here. Don't lay my future plans here. Do not put roots here. There's nothing wrong with taking a job, taking the money, but don't plant roots. And I should not have planted roots there. So I hope today's message helped you guys. So until next time, let me know down in the comments if it does. Take care and God bless.
This video is sponsored by immj. For all my print-on-demand creations like t-shirts, mugs, posters, original photos, my book, The Creative Virus, or what gear I use, visit the shops on immj.com or my Amazon, eBay, or Etsy stores.